Regular BVTV viewers and visitors to bizvision.co.uk will know that we are fully committed to the thinking that the conscious business will be the business that is admired in our new society. But such a business needs to be led correctly by a conscious leader. Such a leader, we believe, is often bred, not born. And to achieve that can require professional coaching, which is what I'll be chatting about with my guest on the show today. He's known as the engagement coach. He's Amrit Sandhar. Welcome, Amrit.
Hi, Malcolm. Thanks for having me.
Lovely to talk to you. Amrit, I said in my opening piece that a conscious business, the business of the future, needs a conscious leader. Now, the skills of such a person are wide and varied, but I believe one is leadership ethics. How important do you think such ethics are in today's new business climate?
Well, I mean, I think ethics, both today and yesterday and tomorrow, will continue to be important. I don't think ethics has changed much. In fairness, if you think about ethics, ethics is about dignity, fairness, equality, diversity, inclusion. It's about making subjective decisions in the moment. It's about judgment. And so for leaders, they're having to do this all the time. This is what they're paid to do, make these challenging and tough decisions. And so I think they've always been important. And what organizations need to do is think about how can we better support leaders? What can we give them as guidelines? We all have personal values, but when you're leading an organization, you're leading a team of people who believe the same things or similar things. And so what are the guidelines we can support leaders with? And that's the organizational values. So, we've all seen organizational values plastered on the backs of toilets, up the escalator, and anywhere else possible. But we don't often see them being lived and breathed. And I think now more than ever it's not that ethics isn't important. It's about how do we dial it up? How do we make sure now that our values across organizations are really being brought to life, being lived and breathed by the leaders, to be truly exemplar of this is what it means to demonstrate that value. Not a tick box exercise, not a piece of work we can get HR involved in terms of fleshing out a list of 3 behaviors that support that value, but genuinely, this is how we bring it to life. And I think that's now more than ever needed. And especially if you think about it, there's people now working from home. Ethics in the past has been visible, or how people behaved, how we did business. Now it's invisible. People are working from home. Our organizational reputations are being brought to life by people who we can't see. And so now more than ever, I think leaders need to be able to demonstrate to teams this is what it's like, and really be the exemplar that this is what good looks like for each of the values.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, Amrit. A big worry at the moment that the hundreds of leaders I've interviewed for our BBTV channels is something you are known for: engagement. They tell me that they are worried that the new hybrid nature or even full-time working from home will damage engagement and create new and perhaps conflicting cultures. How can this be prevented or worked around?
So I'm probably going to go back to basics on this. How we lead teams shouldn't really have changed. There might be things we need to dial up and dial down, but how we lead should be the same. Back when we were in organizations, in offices, in our corporate, or in our office environments, trust was critical. Well, believe it or not, trust is still critical. Who would want to work for a leader who didn't trust them? So that creating that trusting environment, that psychological safety, it's still really important. And I think, how do you go about building trust? Well, we know from the neuroscience of trust, taking time to get to know each other causes, our brains are constantly scanning the environment for threats. We're constantly scanning the environment for threats. And in an environment of change, such as working from home and what have you, it can lead to people reading into things that may or may not be there. But when you take time to get to know people, get to know them as individuals, you reduce that threat. And this is where leaders now need to become, I think, more visible to create that environment of trust. I think the other side of it is clarity. Again, across organizations pre-COVID, we haven't historically been very good at, objective setting, reviewing, performance reviews, and all of that stuff. And I think we need to get back to creating an environment where we are sitting down with our teams, we're being clear of what's expected of them, we're explaining to them why this is important, how it impacts on the organization, the standards we require, the timelines we're working to. And then we just need to get out of the way, let them get on with it. We employ people because of the skills they bring to the table, but then we seem to want to tell them how to do their job. So again, with this environment we're in now, leaders can do an awful lot here to just make sure the clarity is in place, the support is in place, the regular check-ins are in place, not overly checking in. We don't want to micromanage. This is about allowing people to be their best, and then just letting them. And after that, then it's regular communication. Again, that clarity, transparency, honesty of what's happening, what's going on, and you can, believe it or not, create a better culture, a more inclusive culture in the environment we're in now, rather than the worry that you described from some of the leaders of having this environment where we're not visible, and therefore how do we maintain our culture? Actually, everything I've just said, you would argue, or you could argue, is what we should have been doing anyway. So it's now about making sure we're doing it in a consistent, sustainable fashion. That means we carry on enhancing our culture. And I spoke about values. It's also about demonstrating our values. This is about the biggest challenge I think is going to come in. And if people were to look back on COVID and how the challenges we've been through, it's a really good test to see how well we valued our values. How well did we abide by them, adhere to them? How well did we hold others accountable to them? And I think those areas combined together can help enhance our cultures. So whilst we're not there together, it's about, we have to just work that much harder to build the relationships with each other, to communicate, to be clear. And, again, this is something we often talk about, purpose. What are we here to do? And I think galvanizing people behind that purpose, because we can lose sight of it sometimes. And provided, this is no different to having departments working in different, you get siloed working in organizations. Because people are working on different things, they're working in different ways. This is about creating not a them and us, but an us. And I think leaders can do an awful lot to say, here, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is how we operate, and this is why we brought you on board. We need your skills to help us with X, Y, and Z.
I quite agree with you, Amrit. Get rid of the term mission and replace it with purpose. Your approach to people engagement is refreshingly innovative. As you say, you use a data-driven approach to identify those issues and that organizations are struggling with. So how does this work?
So data is something that organizations are churning an awful lot of data, but they're not getting enough time to analyze it. So if you think about employee engagement, that's one lens through which we get insights of how people are feeling. What are they experiencing of your work? But what are the other lenses? I mean, look at exit interviews. Exit interviews are done across most organizations. But I also pretty much guarantee most organizations don't have the capacity to review what the data is telling them. So they get filed away as an exercise that we do when somebody leaves. But what about the rich data that's telling us about what is it like that people have said when they were leaving? If you look at absence data, performance data, all of these things can help create a rich picture of what it's like in your organization. And specifically what we do is employee engagement specialists, you think we'd be advocates for employee engagement surveys. We are to a degree. How do you know the question you're asking is the right question? So we take it back a step beyond that, before that, to say, what questions should we be asking? And we carry out cultural diagnostics. So it's a way of helping organizations understand what's important to your employees. Often engagement surveys are done comparing benchmarking data with other companies in the same sector. Well, we all know companies are very, very different. So what's your data? What are your people saying it's like working for you? Now, Malcolm, if I was to ask you, what's it like for your work? I would not often shove a survey into your nose. I might just come and ask you. Because a survey, you can only answer the question being asked. What is it you're not going to be asked? And so therefore, by having these open sessions to ask you what it's like working here, And we make a scientific approach about it. We have a qualitative and quantitative approach to analyze the feedback, to carry out sentiment analysis, theme it, and present the data to say, here's what it's like working across your organization. Here's what people are saying. Then using that information, going back to basic principles, what gets measured gets done. Let's track that, see how we progress, and make improvements in those areas. So we
I think
tend to
that's
use that.
great. Yeah. I understand that, Amrit. And I suppose many people, well, I'm like it. I fill a survey in and I fill in what I think they want to hear. But surely getting deeper means that you've got to really start to be understanding that as you say, you're going to use that data. And I suggest that many companies are frightened to use it. They're frightened to know what they don't know.
I think you're probably right to a degree, where there's an element of that. But I also think there's an element of, because we're not asking the right questions, we get conflicting data. Do I turn left? Do I turn right? In this question they're saying this, but in that question they're saying that. And then there's a load of questions they're saying, oh, I neither agree or disagree. How do we know any of this is relevant? And therein lies the challenge. It's hard to make actionable actions from information that, rubbish in, rubbish out. So what we need to know is, again, going back, if I wanted to know how my wife felt about our relationship, I wouldn't ask her to fill in a survey. I'd talk to her. That would give me rich data. But we'd use surveys because it's a really quick way of analyzing. It's a quick way of collating data. But if we really wanted to know, we'd find other methods. Now, look, I headed up employee engagement for Asda. We had 175,000 people. I couldn't go and talk to everybody. So we have to use these tools. What we then need to think about is, how do we use a step before that to understand what's important to employees, then ask those questions that are relevant. And then we might have at least half a chance of saying, if nothing else, we know what's not working and we know what is working. How do we fix some of these areas?
It's hard enough at the moment working from home and putting relationships without me giving my wife a questionnaire. No. What are the three principal reasons why leaders are poor in their engagement with their people? I want to be a bit contentious here, by the way, Amrit, because I've got to say to you, from the hundreds of interviews I've been doing, that women leaders are being far better with their engagement with their working from home people than the male leaders. Now, I understand years ago the I'm the boss mentality, but surely that's changing now. Or am I wrong in my thinking?
No, I think you're right. I think that has changed and is changing. But I don't think people are going out of their way to create the environments they're creating. I think this shows the conscious leader. I don't think leaders are always cognizant of the environment they're creating, because they're so busy focused on what they need to do, their objectives. I think the culture it just morphs into what it is. We don't make a conscious effort to decide what we want to create of it. So if you think about, I mentioned trust. I think trust is a critical factor. There's an awful lot of information about the neuroscience of trust. But what's also missing is also the upskilling of leaders to understand how they can go about doing this. It's not that they don't want to. It's not that they don't know that it's important. Sometimes they just don't know how.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to empower them to say, here's how you create trust. And some of these things we know an awful lot about how you can do it. And even if you think about the power of inclusion, so creating this inclusive environment, we know from diversity and inclusion, creativity and innovation, inclusion is critical. But we also know that the impact of exclusion, it's the same as physical pain in the brain. We don't like it being excluded as human beings. It's not in our nature. We don't like it. And so how do we create this inclusive culture? Now, we don't go about creating exclusive cultures or excluding people. It happens by accident. I thought you were going to email that person. Oh, I thought you were going to invite them. A lot of things happen by accident. So it's trying to become more cognizant as a leader to say, what can we do? So trust. How do I go about building an environment of trust? How do I go about building an environment of inclusion? And I think the other bit is probably about authenticity. Now, I'm not saying leaders are being inauthentic. I just think there's an awful lot that leaders don't realize that can impact on them. Who are you when you're at home? And is that the same person at work? How much of your title is impacting on power and influence and on your ability to lead? We've all had our partners tell us, whether you're male or female, that you're not at work now, because they can see how you're behaving at home. isn't how you normally behave. And yet we seem to think at work we can behave differently. So I think there's this thing about authenticity, but I also think um, self preservation and well-being. There's an awful lot, again, we know, and being an ex-pharmacist, I tend to focus on this stuff, but we know the impact of diet, exercise, taking time to think. All of these things make a big difference for you to be an authentic leader. Otherwise, we're running on, looking over our shoulder, wondering what we need to be doing, what do people expect of us, as opposed to being authentically grounded in, here's who I am, and here's what I stand for, and here's what I'm trying to achieve for the better, for the betterment of the company as a whole. So I think those
Brilliant.
three key areas.
Yeah, excellent. Now, tell us about your thinking behind chronobiology to improve work engagement and productivity. First of all, what is chronobiology?
Chronobiology. It sounds fantastic, doesn't it? So chronobiology is an area of science that began, I think it was in, well, certainly the first sort of experiments were the 1729 or 1700s, and it was to do with a plant and how the leaves opened up, and what the scientists identified was, irrespective of how dark the plant, what sort of darkness the plant was kept in, it still responded to a 24-hour cycle. And that spurred the research into present day environments, where we know now that every living system is dictated by a 24-hour rhythm, circadian rhythm. So your body has a natural rhythm of when you want to go to bed, when you want to get up, when you have peak levels of alertness, and when you have low levels of alertness. And we know this from science. Now, there are some people out there who just can't go to bed early. They will stay up late at night because their brains are wired, they're buzzing. But then they also get up late. And there's some people who go to bed very early, get up very early. And yet we seem to think this 9 to 5 way of working applies to everybody, and it doesn't. And what we need to do is think about how do we create an environment where we start to get the best out of us. So, for example, in chronobiology, we know between the hours of 10 in the morning and 12 midday, our levels of alertness are the highest, as is the case between sort of 4 and 6 in the evening. Now, around 2 or 3 p.m., we start to feel a slump. That's because our levels are the lowest. So when we know that, we might want to do some of our best work in those peak area energy levels, and some of the mundane stuff between 2 and 3. And so it's trying to think about how do we adjust our levels of how we work to fit into how our bodies work, rather than the other way around. Our bodies work to this 24-hour rhythm. We can't change that. Or if we do, it's to our detriment. What we can do is change work. And I know in America, back in, I think it was the 80s or 90s, Best Buy did the results-only work environment. And the whole focus there was, you deliver the results in your way. You just need to know what we're trying to deliver. And I think we need to go back to that. So we start to fit into this circadian rhythm that we can't break, or unless it breaks us. So we're wired into this circadian rhythm. Let's work to the 24-hour rhythms of our bodies and get the best out of us. That's the whole point of chronobiology.
Yeah. I'm really understanding that really strongly, Amrit. I still think I'm doing my paper round, which was over 50 years ago, isn't it? And my mental set is in the morning. That's why I would do morning breakfast speaking rather than after dinner speaking.
And that's probably a reason why the paper round worked for you so well, because that was your circadian rhythm.
Yeah, that's right. That's in the days when people would read newspapers, by the way. The USA Army says there are 32 traits of a good leader, which to me is far too many. Before you go into war, you better go tick your 32 traits. What do you think are the essential traits of a good leader?
So this is really interesting. Before I set up the company, I worked in various organizations, and one of the jobs I had was in the Sunday Times Best Companies and analyzing data. And what I'd seen in my years in operations as well, there were three things that kept coming out at me, both in the data, but anecdotally that I was seeing. And I've mentioned trust already. It's a really, really important thing. The ability to develop trusting relationships and trust around you. I think the other one, which is partly my background, but I also think there's more in it. So wisdom. In the Western world, we don't talk about wisdom. But wisdom is the ability to look back and learn from past experiences, to make better decisions going forward. And so, in this world where we're rushing around like headless chickens, when do we pause and take time to think? How do we, we often in organizations will do a review and see how, but they tend to be tick boxes, how something performed. But they tend to be tick boxes as opposed to genuinely going back and saying, what happened there? And that is also conducive to creating a learning environment. When was the last time an organization ever celebrated the biggest cock up? It doesn't happen. We hide mistakes. So wisdom, I think, is the ability to learn from these things, knowing that mistakes make us better. So, and the last one, I mentioned this before, is authenticity. It's not people are trying to be inauthentic. It's understanding how I can be authentic. How can I be the real me? And partly that is, again, we make an assumption that leaders know their own values. I think it's a personal journey we all go through. And I think identifying who you are and what you stand for is really important, to say, this is what I will and won't tolerate, and aligning yourself to the organization to say, that's the best organizational fit for me because their values align to my values. So it's all about this whole values alignment. So I think trust, wisdom, and authenticity, and they are the pillars that we built the organization on, because those were the things that I kept seeing crop up again and again and again.
I like that very much indeed. Wise thoughts there, Amrit, wise thoughts. In a recent interview I held in Portland, Oregon, with futurist Rebecca D. Costa, she said, and in her book On the Verge, that today's leaders need to learn agility and adaptation, but to forget trying to do it fast, they need to learn pre-adaptation. Now, that seems sensible. If you know it's going to happen, why wait until it does? That is, to do it well before it happens. COVID is demanding changes. People hate change. So, what should conscious leaders be doing now to prepare for inevitable change?
I think change. Firstly, we need to understand that we don't like change, and we're human beings. We're a funny breed. So on one hand, we don't like change. We like certainty, the regularity that comes. The certainty that comes from regularity. On the other hand, we don't. We get bored, so we seek new pastures and adventures and what have you. I think so inherently, it's not that we don't like change, we just like certainty. And I think as leaders, um, change, there's a step before change that often gets missed, the precursor to change. And that's creating that environment of trust. If our brains are constantly scanning the environment for threats, imagine what that would be like in an environment of mistrust. Every single thing going on, you'd sit there thinking, hang on, is that another threat? Is that another threat? So I think it's about creating this precursor to change, which is having an environment where we're open and transparent. It's just the way we do things. So when communications come out, people aren't questioning it. They aren't saying, yeah, but that's what they're telling us. What's really going on behind the scenes? So they get used to this approach of, that's how it is. So we're going to be open and honest with you, warts and all, so that people can make informed decisions. Even down to, and there's been cases where in the past where engagement levels went up when a company was going through redundancy because people were given the certainty to know where they stood, so they could take steps against it or mitigate against it. So I think this whole preparing for changes, precursor to changes, certainly trust and visible leadership. Pre-COVID, people used to complain to say, well, I don't know who the leaders are, I don't see them. Now more than ever, there's a chance that we won't see any leaders. And so how do we allow people to, and this goes back to trust, it's about forming relationships remotely. So you can, we've seen conferences where we go to, or certainly we used to go to, where we would form opinions of leaders from afar based on what they were saying, how they acted, their mannerisms. And the same is true now. We will make decisions about people if we see them. And so when we see changes being made, we can at least make them in the context of, but they seem okay. They seem all right. We formed an opinion of them. But if we don't have an opinion of them, who knows what they're like? And then for them to then be making decisions that they know nothing about my role, it seeds mistrust. So this whole combination of trust, honest communication. There's also something in psychology called the social identity theory. And it's about leaders coming together to create an us. I mentioned the them and us. Well, leaders, their whole role should be focused on how do we create this unity of a team spirit, and galvanizing that around a purpose works really well. So getting people to understand here's what we're here to do. This is our role. This is what our objectives are, the purposes. But then what we tend to do is we tend to tell people what we're going to do. Why don't we involve them? One thing we've learned this year more than any other year is leaders don't have all the answers. Knowing that, why wouldn't we involve more people? I mentioned briefly I used to be a pharmacist, and when you're learning cell biology, you learn very quickly the more receptors a cell has around it, the better it's able to adapt to its environment. Now imagine a boardroom of 5 or 7 people trying to make decisions on hundreds. It just wouldn't happen. Why don't we get people involved? The receptors on the outside will tell us far more of what's really going on in the environment than what we think, and keep that two-way loop going. So I think that's critical. So this precursor to change, this trust environment, this honest communication, visible leadership, working to an us as a collective, and I think this focus on feedback is critical, and people have the answers. Leaders are facilitators. They're no longer there to say, let me tell you what we should be doing. They are facilitators to help find the answers from the people out there who know what you should be doing. And I think
Yeah.
that's the point.
Yeah, I love your concept and thoughts about trust and this constant scanning for threats. I was talking to one senior manager who suddenly left a large media company, that one of those companies that we all know. And I said, "Why did you leave?" He says, "Well, every time I felt that they were patting me on my back, I think they were just looking for the soft spot for the knife."
And unfortunately, that's the environment that makes all the difference. How can you ever do your best work when you're looking over your shoulder?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yet we seem to think that, we all talk about it. We all know, we talk about psychological safety, but this is
mm,
how critical it is that if I'm working, why, it seems crazy, doesn't it, that we bring talented people into our organization, and then we want them to do their best work, but then we're going to micromanage them. We're going to tell them how they need to be doing
yeah,
their work. And and let's not forget, we're talking about engagement. This engagement is what happens to people. It's what we do to them. They join engaged. They join full of hope and optimism that they can do some great work. This engagement, the thing we're measuring in engagement surveys, what we're measuring is what we've done to them.
yeah,
We
yeah,
mustn't forget that.
yeah. Let the butterfly fly. Tomorrow's business leaders are sitting at a home desk or tucked away in a socially distant corner of an empty office at the moment. I'm suggesting that the current workplace environment may be impacting both engagement and succession planning, and that those leaders of tomorrow are not being identified or getting the grounding they need for the future. What do you urge employers to do about this, if you think I may be right?
I think what we need to do is think about who are we looking to promote and why. What are the skills we're looking for? What we don't want is somebody who's got all of them. What we want to do is develop them. Who's showing the potential to developing those skills? So, surprise, surprise, trust. Who's out there working hard to build a relationship with their teams? Who's out there communicating honestly with transparency to really galvanize the team spirit? Who's performing well? Who's using a coaching approach rather than tell-do approach? These things are these things are going on all the time. Leaders are leading and managers are managing all the time. Our job is going to be to find out who's doing this well. And so looking at what are the measures, metrics in organizations that can give us an indication. So employee engagement surveys will tell us something. But performance metrics, how well are people performing? How well are the reviews being done? How often are they being done? I think, and even managers spending time with their teams, there'll be leaders in there who need promoting, who should be promoted. We'll get an idea of what people are like. There's often in organizations people will say, if only they knew what I did. And I think what we need to do is find out what they're doing. These talented people are working away and they're doing a great job. I think what we need to do is get close to them to understand how well a job they're doing. It's they can only do so much. They're too busy focused on the day job and trying to get their teams to be brilliant. Our job is now to go out there and look for these little gems out there in our organizations that we need to promote to help enhance that culture across the organization. So we're promoting the right type of people. So I think engaging leadership, if I was to summarize it, is what we're after. And so we need to find ways of identifying what does that look like in our organization, What are the measures and metrics we can find? I mean, even down to exit interviews. If people are leaving, why are they leaving? If people are absent, why are they absent? What's the performance data like? Again, going back to data, there's an awful lot there. It'll all come out in the wash somewhere. How you lead people comes out in data somewhere. And whilst we don't want to be scrutinizing that all on its own, it's to take that into account with the relationships we build with the individuals, so we can help understand where they need support. Some of them may not know how, and for those who do, great. Let's look at how do we promote them, who live and breathe our values, who live and breathe everything we stand for.
Yeah, great thinking, Amrit. And I urge people to take action in what you're just saying there, because the recruitment company leaders that I've interviewed tell me they've never seen so many people looking for new jobs or looking around what's going on. Amrit, I like to give all my guests 3 wishes. How would you use your 3 wishes to help leaders of today become better leaders for tomorrow?
The first wish, I think, is to educate everybody, and I don't mean that in a belittling fashion. I think there's an awful lot I've learned on my own journey, but the education of things like neurogenesis, the fact that we can, no matter what age, we can still carry on building brain cells. The fact that for neuroplasticity, the fact that we have this ability, our brain has the ability to learn and grow all the time, growth mindset. So that would be my first wish, is really, we know it, but to bring it to life. So we can create environments where we can truly grow and people around us can truly grow. I think the second wish is time to think. You know, everybody would say, I don't have enough time. But one of my own personal experiences has been reflective practice has been so powerful, to take time to think, to make sense of what's going on around us, not just now, but, you know, anytime, and to help make informed decisions. So wisdom, going back to that. And finally, the wish of authenticity. I grew up as a child lacking confidence when I was early in my, early on. And I know what that felt like, you know, looking over your shoulder, not quite certain, not quite sure. And then eventually, maybe it's with age, you develop a sense of self and an authentic self of who am I, what do I stand for? And I think, you know, you come across things, the concepts like the imposter syndrome. We've all worked with people who are still trying to find out who they are. And I think that is one wish I think would be a very powerful one, that the sooner we can identify who we are, we can live the lives we want to live, being the people we are, the better we'll have the relationships of the people going on around us.
Some very, very sound thinking, Amrit. And I hope all my viewers have taken details down of your URL, which is on the screen behind me. Amrit Sandhar, the engagement coach. I'm going to go away with 3 words: trust, wisdom, authenticity, that are resonating with me from our interview today. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.